Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. Haunted house workers. What's the worst thing you've ever seen while working? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Every year, my OA Lodge, the Boy Scout Honor Society thing, holds a haunted walk for the Cub Scouts and anyone else who wants to go. This walk takes place in a very overgrown field, also known as very tall grass, and ends in an old barn. 2 years ago, our theme was zombies. One of the last skit sections was set up as a police FBI barricade, flashing lights and all. So the group turns the corner and, being scared, sees the flashing lights and becomes hopeful that the scaring is over. Unluckily for them, this is where I come in, a 6'6" tall guy. I'm walking towards the group, hunched over to the point where to them it looks like I'm maybe 5 feet tall. As soon as I hear the kids start to ask their parents what that thing is, I jump up to full height and sprint at them with a death wail coming out of my mouth. The group splits down the middle as I run through, and suddenly I have to dodge a kid thrust at me by his father, who's yelling, taking him with tears of fright in his eyes. TLDR. Dad shoved his young son at me as a sacrifice in order to be spared. My parents met for the first time in a haunted house. My father was working there for the summer, and his job was to stand beneath the stairs and shake some of the loose steps back and forth while making scary noises, etc. Well, one night, my mother and some of her friends went through said haunted house. They eventually made it to the stairs where my father worked. He shook one of the steps, and my mother stumbled, breaking the heel off her high-heeled boots. She put up a stink and got my father fired. So for years after that, they told the story, with my father claiming some crazy bitch got him fired, and my mother claiming some douche almost killed her in a haunted house. It wasn't until they were dating about 4 years later that they figured it out. When I was in second grade, my daycare put on a haunted house for the parents. I was in my own room dressed as a ghost and was supposed to say boo when guests started walking in. I began to cry because I was scared of them, the strobe light, and the loud music. One of the daycare staff had to sit with me while I cried and said boo to the people walking by. I didn't work at the haunted house, but I went to it around the same time that this happened. Some girl working there was supposed to be in a bathtub with a loose rope around her neck, but she slipped and ended up hanging herself. Luckily, another one of the employees noticed while walking through and got her down before she died. It was at Creepy World in St. Louis, for those that wanted to look it up. I work in a haunted house around this time of year, and it's surprisingly laid back. There are a few rooms that have set costumes and set people, but about 50% of the rooms are just grab a costume and be scary. The final room is a clown room, and that's the room me and most of my friends would take and scare people. The most common thing to happen is for people to just freeze. They just stop in the middle of the tour and scream. The only way to get them to move is to come out of character and tell them they have to go. My favorite spot is after the clown room, where you make a hard right and go down a long dark hallway to leave. Right outside of the room, there's a little nook that you can sit in if you were to go left out of the clown room instead of right down the hallway. Anyways, the funniest thing I've ever seen has to be the time I was sitting in that nook with a chainsaw and the first person came around the corner. They didn't see me, so when I revved the chainsaw, she took off running and not only got about 2 steps before she promptly fall on her face. This is where it gets good. With it being a dark hallway, the rest of the tour also took off running from hearing the chainsaw, and one after another, they fell. The pileup at the end was somewhere between 8 and 10 people. I had to put the chainsaw down and go help, but I hardly could. I was laughing so hard. This isn't about a specific story, more just a realization that I used to see a lot more of haunted houses. Maybe it's just regional, but I don't know. I kind of like the idea of it, and I know it's seasonal for the most part, but Keep doing what you're doing, guys. I like it. Story number 1. I went to a haunted house with my husband. Some guy jumped out at us waving a chainsaw. He was really sad when we laughed, but then we told him that there was a group of middle school boys right behind us. He thanked us for the tip and went to lay in wait for them. About 60 seconds later, they ran past us at full speed with him chasing them as fast as he could. It was hilarious. It wasn't as hilarious when we went to the next room and the kids decided that we were close enough to adults to count. They, all 4 of them, grabbed us by the arms and would not let go until we had safely escorted them out of the haunted house. Story number 2. I was at a husband's haunted house with my husband, and the room we were in was a very, very dark maze. Someone dressed in black reached out and touched me. I screamed and punched him as hard as I could in the torso, just below the point where the ribs come together. Then I apologized about 100 times, poor guy. Story number 3. I went to a local haunted house with my cousins and uncle when I was about 12. Another cousin was working and told the guy in the chainsaw room to give her little cousins a special show. He came after us with the chainsaw and backed us into a corner. I collapsed on the ground in the fetal position, put my arms over my head, and refused to move. If he'd have been a real slasher, I would have been dead in about 30 seconds. Currently working at one. I just got done with my second weekend yesterday. Somehow I haven't witnessed many of these, but this is an all first-hand account from other actors. My friend last year made at least 2 people shit themselves. This year, while I was with him, we made a blonde woman start sobbing. We were in the hillbilly room. There's a claustrophobic hallway that has these walls that are like 2 bouncy castle walls, really close to each other. 2 guests pissed their pants in those. Lots of guests punched actors. Some apologize and give hugs afterwards. It depends on the actor, but you usually won't get reported for doing that. If you just punch because I'm gonna punch you, then all bets are off, and we will kick you the F out. This has happened a lot over the past 2 weeks. We're only open on Friday and Saturday, so this past weekend was our second week open for the season. Also attacking the actors for shits and gigs, there's one girl who hides in a refrigerator and scares people by opening it. She opened it, and some dude shoved her back in, and then started shaking and banging on the fridge. That. Also, dude bros were getting up in the actors' faces because they started yelling at the girl. This seems to only happen with the male actors because I started telling this one girl we would string her up, blah, 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 hillbilly spiel, and her boyfriend just smirked and laughed. But my friend started up. Dude bro got up in my friend's face and was like, "Don't do that." Kids. Effing kids. Now, some kids are cool. There was one boy who came in and he was scared, and I did my zombie growl roar at him, and his parents were just like, "It's okay, it's not real." And then he looked at me, waved and said, "Hello," and I smiled and waved back. The smile I got in return was worth breaking character. But when the kid doesn't want to be there and the mom is bringing him through, Jesus, we don't hold back for children. One of my friends started telling the kid that his mommy couldn't protect him here, started crying. In the next room, the kid starts bawling again, etc. The mom starts yelling at the actor saying, "Why would you do that? Bitch, why would you bring your kid in here?" And on that note, guests are telling us to stop yelling, like getting in our faces, and to calm down. What? You paid for this. Why are you here? And then there's the just in-house drama. Like one bitch who having complaints the entire time. She was given a really expensive mask and costume to wear. She ripped that mask to shreds and then had the audacity to say, "Oh, it was like that when I got it." No, it wasn't, bitch. I was the first day we opened. That mask looked brand new. This is also the same bitch who decided to give her boyfriend a BJ in the parking lot during work hours. We're short-staffed as is, damn it. It's fun, though. You make friends with your fellow non-bitchy actors. 2 a.m. fast food runs are the best since most of us are all in still full makeup, and we live in a college town, so everyone is out at 2 a.m. getting fast food. TL, DR, shit, piss, punchy guests, dude bros, kids, bitches, blowjobs, and fast food. You might be jumped by zombies if you F with us. I went to a haunted house with my family when I was about 10. My little sister, 8 at the time, kept insisting that she wanted to go off alone. She wasn't allowed to, but at some point she snuck off. Well, the haunted house closed, and my family's all sitting outside the entrance, waiting for her to come out. The majority of it is a maze, with a guy with a chainsaw chasing you around. That actor came out and talked to us, and we told him my little sister's name. So he goes around the maze screaming, "Brittany, I'm going to find you. You better get out of this maze," for like 10 minutes. And then she finally comes out running, sobbing with a bright red face. That was so effed up to do to an 8-year-old. I once volunteered at a haunted house when I was 16. I was the introduction, sort of. I had a mad scientist costume on, and I was sitting at a desk petting a rat. When people opened the door, I was supposed to look up and say, "Welcome," as creepily as possible. Well, a group of teenage girls walk in, and I feel like this is going to be a good scare. So I say my line, and all of them get scared except one. She just kind of looks at me, then looks to her friends and says, "He's kind of cute." The rest of them were like, "Oh my God, you can say that here?" And I just face palmed as they left into the next room. I worked in security at one for a while. There was an area where you went through a maze and the walls were a mix of jail-style bars and mirrors. The room was filled with fog and super bright strobe lights. Here's the kicker. One of the walls could be moved to close the maze and send the person into a circle with no way out. The employees were allowed to send people into that loop, which only added like 3 minutes to the time. Well, the room itself was referred to as the seizure room. At least every other day, someone had a seizure in there. One night a kid gets sent into the circle, and because of the dense fog and frequent moving of staff, which gave you a killer headache to be there for too long, no one noticed he didn't come out. About 30 minutes later, a patron starts yelling and we see him. Other patrons had seen him but assumed it was okay. He had a seizure and he hit his head when he fell. Lots of blood. He was okay when the ambulance took him out. Just a really bad head laceration. Many rules were made about the maze after that. I worked at one when I was in high school. Basically how the scene played out was that there was an inbred hillbilly cannibal sitting in a lawn chair screaming at our guests. He would say a cue, and then a zombie would pounce from behind the chair and eat him. While the guests were distracted with that, someone would pull a drop window and further terrify them. I was the guy with the drop window. We got a call on the employee walkie-talkie system that there was a kid who wasn't taking the whole experience well, and we should tone it down a little bit when he comes through. My adolescent brain registered this as effing with the kid as much as possible. Kid comes through visibly shaken with dried tears in his eyes. My colleagues do their zombie cannibal thing, and the kid starts flipping out. Now's my chance. I drop the window, get right into his face, and scream, "I'm going to kill your parents." Kid shits his pants while letting out the most horrifying scream I've ever heard in my life. Emily Rose is having a really bad trip. Even worse, I was in charge of the air cannon. So when his friends pulled him out into the nearby hallway, I gave him a few bursts of that. Apparently he collapsed in the next room, and the higher-ups had to carry his shit-stained body out of the house. I had a nice chew-out session with my boss after that one. TLDR, 16-year-old Ergahol 666 pushes the kid too far, and he promptly shits himself. I was the guy at the end with the chainsaw for a while. It was a college town, so that was the majority of our guests. Probably the worst thing that happened was how quickly friends would leave each other behind to get away. I set it as a goal to split people into groups, but they made it too easy. There were girls who would push someone back toward me so they could escape, or couples where the guy would have a shot down the hall and would leave the girl behind. TLDR. Some of your friends are a guy with a chainsaw away from sacrificing you. Every year my neighborhood gets together to put together a Halloween block party the weekend prior to Halloween. It had a tiki bar for parents to go get liquor from, a haunted house set up for kids and adults to go through, made out of plywood, bounce houses, and other kids' attractions and food. Everyone in the neighborhood participated in it somehow or another. I was a regular staff member in the haunted house, was no holds barred and really creative as a kid, So my scaring spots were usually some of the best and most unexpected. I'm talking about dropping out of the roof, popping out of hay bales, distracting people with a dummy, then scaring them. The area the haunted house and block party were in the neighborhood was usually where everyone gathered after trick-or-treating in the neighborhood, so while the haunted house was up, we still had people come through it. In my city, we got a ton of press, so we had people from neighborhoods all over coming in. Now to the story. One Halloween, after getting all of my candy, I went to the haunted house to be the son of a bitch and scare the out of people, no matter what their age. We had this one kid show up who went to school with most of the neighborhood kids, but didn't actually live there. He lived in a nicer area, and regularly acted like he was better than us, so no one liked him. All week at school, he bragged about not being scared of anything, and that our haunted house couldn't scare him. So when we saw him come toward it with his parents, we got stoked and decided to go all out. I hid in a tree at the end of the haunted house to give them one last scare. They made their way through, and they were screaming, the mom, the dad, and the kid, just freaking the F out, because we were demon children and got a fix for that type of shit. They come out of the haunted house relieved, thinking it's over. So once they catch their breath and the fog machine goes off, I make my leap out of the tree, landing less than 3 feet in front of them. I scared the shit out of the kid, literally. I made him shit himself. His mom fainted, but the worst was his dad. The asshole kid's dad was so scared that he turned and ran into the wall of the haunted house, hitting his head. This caused him to stumble back and fall on the metal picket fence behind him, somehow impaling himself on it. So I'm sitting there, still scaring the kid with my mom on the ground, and Dad sitting there being impaled on the fence. I thought it was fake. It wasn't. Dad almost died. He pulled himself off the fence, almost disemboweling himself in front of his kid, while they think his wife is dead from a heart attack. TLDR. I scared a kid so bad he shit himself and had to go to therapy because I nearly killed his parents.